On a gray morning in Providence, Rhode Island, a woman walked through the doors of municipal court carrying more than just her purse. She had multiple parking tickets, each one representing a moment when life had gotten in the way of moving her car on time. Her name wasn't recorded in the court docket with any fanfare. She was simply another case on Judge Frank Caprio's calendar that day, one of dozens who would stand before the bench seeking justice, mercy, or both. Judge Frank Caprio had presided over Providence Municipal Court for decades, earning a reputation that stretched far beyond Rhode Island. His courtroom wasn't like others. While most judges maintained strict professional distance, Caprio had built something different, a place where people felt heard. His show, Caught in Providence, had introduced millions of viewers worldwide to a kind of justice that balanced law with humanity. But on this particular day, even he couldn't have predicted what was about to unfold. Parking tickets might seem trivial to some, but for people living paycheck to paycheck, they represent real crisis. A single ticket can mean choosing between paying the fine or buying groceries. Multiple tickets compound into hundreds of dollars, money that could cover rent, utilities, or medication. The woman standing in line that morning knew this arithmetic intimately. Each piece of paper in her hand represented a calculation she'd have to make, a bill she'd have to juggle, a consequence of circumstances beyond her control. When her name was finally called, she approached the bench with visible anxiety. Judge Caprio greeted her with his characteristic warmth, immediately putting her at ease in a way that courtrooms rarely do. He asked her to explain the circumstances behind the tickets. What came next wasn't a rehearsed excuse or a legal defense. It was simply the truth, a story of hardship, of trying to keep everything together while the world seemed determined to make it harder. She spoke quietly, honestly, about why she'd accumulated the violations. Judge Caprio did something that distinguishes him from many on the bench. He listened. Not just to determine guilt or innocence, but to understand the person before him. He asked follow-up questions, not to trap or interrogate, but to comprehend the full picture of her life. What emerged was a portrait of someone doing her best in difficult circumstances, someone who wasn't trying to evade responsibility but who was struggling under the weight of it. The courtroom grew quiet as the conversation deepened, the cameras capturing something more profound than a traffic hearing. Frank Caprio's approach to justice was shaped by his own family's immigrant story. His father had come to America with nothing, working as a milkman to provide for his family. Caprio grew up understanding struggle, understanding that good people sometimes find themselves in difficult situations. This philosophy informed every decision he made from the bench. He'd often said that his courtroom was a place where people deserved second chances, where compassion could coexist with the law. Today would be a testament to that belief. After hearing her story, Judge Caprio leaned back in his chair, considering. The law was clear about parking violations, fines were assessed, payment was expected. But the law also granted judges discretion, the ability to consider circumstances and mitigating factors. He looked at the woman before him, at the worry etched on her face, at the burden she was carrying. Then he made his decision. He dismissed the tickets. Not reduced them, not offered a payment plan, dismissed them entirely. The relief that washed over her face was immediate and profound. What happened next surprised everyone in the courtroom. As the woman processed the judge's decision, emotion overwhelmed her. Tears filled her eyes, not tears of sadness, but of gratitude, of relief, of feeling seen and valued by a system that often makes people feel small. And then she asked a question that courtrooms almost never hear. She asked Judge Caprio if she could give him a hug. The request hung in the air for a moment, unconventional and deeply human, a bridge between the formal world of law and the raw world of human connection. Courtrooms are governed by protocols and formalities. There's a physical and symbolic distance between the bench and those who appear before it. Judges don't typically engage in physical contact with defendants. It's a boundary meant to preserve impartiality and authority. But Frank Caprio had never been a typical judge. Without hesitation, he rose from his chair and stepped down from the bench. He met her in that space between law and compassion, between judgment and humanity, and he embraced her. The courtroom watched in silence as two people shared a moment of genuine human connection. That hug lasted only a few seconds, but its meaning extended far beyond the moment. For the woman, it represented validation. Someone in authority had not only heard her but had responded with kindness. For Judge Caprio, it was simply an extension of how he'd always tried to serve. But for the courtroom observers and the millions who would later watch the video, it represented something many had stopped believing in: the possibility of compassion within systems we often experience as cold and impersonal. The cameras captured it all, preserving this small act of humanity. When the video was posted online, it spread rapidly. Within days, millions of people around the world had watched this exchange between a judge and a woman with parking tickets. Comments poured in from every continent, people sharing their own experiences with legal systems that had felt harsh or unforgiving. Many said it restored their faith in justice. Others simply said it made them cry. The video was shared across social media platforms, translated into multiple languages, discussed in forums and comment sections. A simple act of kindness had touched something universal. The video's impact wasn't just about one generous ruling. It resonated because it challenged assumptions about how justice must function. Most people's experiences with courts and legal systems involve rigidity, bureaucracy, and a sense of powerlessness. We're taught that the law is blind, impartial, unmoved by individual stories. But Judge Caprio demonstrated that justice doesn't have to be cold to be fair. That authority doesn't require cruelty. That rules can be applied with wisdom rather than just strictness. This was the alternative people had been hungry to see. Judge Caprio's courtroom exists within a larger conversation about criminal justice reform and the treatment of low-level offenses. Across America, municipal courts often function as revenue generators, with fines and fees disproportionately impacting the poor. People can find themselves trapped in cycles of debt over minor violations, facing arrest warrants for unpaid tickets they couldn't afford in the first place. Some jurisdictions have begun re-evaluating these systems, recognizing that punitive approaches to poverty solve nothing. Judge Caprio had been practicing this more humane approach for years, long before it became a reform talking point. Frank Caprio had handled thousands of cases over his decades on the bench, and while not every defendant received dismissed charges, each received something equally valuable: dignity. He remembered that traffic court was often people's only interaction with the justice system, and those experiences shaped how citizens viewed law and order. Would they leave feeling the system was fair or rigged? Would they feel heard or dismissed? These questions mattered to him. His legacy wouldn't be measured in convictions or revenue collected, but in lives touched and faith restored in the possibility of compassionate justice. After that embrace, the woman left the courtroom with more than just dismissed tickets. She carried with her the experience of being valued by someone in power, of having her struggles acknowledged rather than dismissed. We don't know her name or the full details of her life story. The court records don't tell us what happened to her after that day. But that's perhaps fitting. This wasn't about one person's redemption arc. It was about a moment when the system worked as it should, when the scales of justice were balanced not just with law, but with mercy. In the end, what happened in that Providence courtroom wasn't revolutionary. Judge Caprio didn't overturn precedent or change the law. He simply recognized a person's humanity and responded to it with his own. The woman didn't perform a heroic act, she just asked for connection in a place where connection is rare. And yet, these small gestures, a dismissed ticket, a hug, a moment of genuine compassion, reminded millions of people of a simple truth we often forget: that systems are made of people, and people can choose kindness. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply treat each other as human beings worthy of grace. That's the lesson that transcended a parking ticket case and became something much larger. That's why, years later, people still remember the woman who came to court and asked a judge for a hug.